good evening, and welcome to episode 68 of the Political Mic. I'm so excited to come back for a week like this after a long hiatus, and to have the panel that I have. I mean, the collective IQ is off the charts of this group, and I'm so excited to have each of them represented here tonight. I'm excited to see what they each bring to the table. We have Professor Foster, of course, who's a regular panelist of this platform, professor of public policy at Oakwood University. And also is the director of the program for public policy at Oakwood University, who formerly worked at AT&T, graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School, and he also attended a few classes at the Wharton School of Business. So, Professor Foster, thanks for being back and making time. Professor Fred Cook, another favorite professor of mine, who teaches as an adjunct professor at Howard University School of Law. He is, of course, a practicing attorney. He has been an adjunct faculty member of Howard Law since 1992, one of the founding members of the Black Entertainment and Sports Lawyers Association. He's also a member of the Washington Bar Association Hall of Fame. So, Professor Cook, thanks for making time. Thanks for being back on. Mr. Stephen Foster, who's a retired AT&T advertising services media consultant, an account executive, and a former business analyst with Dun & Bradstreet, who's now a freelance journalist and a blogger and interactive director of What They Should Say, a progressive nonprofit public policy advocacy and communications agency. Mr. Foster, thanks for being back. And we have Professor Harold McDougall, who is a professor at Howard University School of Law. He was a civil rights organizer and voter registrant in his early years and served as he served the NAACP from 1994 to 97 as executive vice president of a local branch, as Washington bureau chief, and a senior policy consultant. He also is a contributor to the Huffington Post. We're going to be joined by another friend of mine, Nate Honore, who's a recent graduate of Quinnipiac University School of Law. But I want to kick off the conversation. This has been a very eventful week, of course. Biden seems to, in the words of George H.W. Bush during the 1988, I think the Iowa caucuses, when he started to get some momentum, he told a reporter, "I've got the big mo." And so Biden seems to be having the big mo at this moment. This is coming at a time when a lot of pundits, including the low, polling numbers over the months, have indicated that Biden was underwater, even within his own party, as many refused to even acknowledge, even Democrats, that they would support him for a re-election bid in 2024. Well, this Sunday, things changed. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed by the Senate. It's going to the House and looks like it's heading straight to Biden's desk. Senate Democrats delivered a dramatic win for President Joe Biden's effort to fight climate change on Sunday, passing a bill that will devote hundreds of billions of dollars to clean energy sources and speed the U.S. transition away from fossil fuels. This bill includes $369 billion in climate change and energy provisions that will transform how Americans get their energy and shape the country's climate and industrial policy for decades. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer teed up the final vote, calling the legislation the boldest climate package in U.S. history. This bill will also allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices, and it also addresses tax reform. And so this is a very impactful bill. This is coming at a time when Build Back Better looked like it was dead. But I want to get your thoughts, panelists. Is the Inflation Reduction Act still a monumental climate change achievement when it leases out 60 million acres of land for offshore drilling cuts and greenhouse gas emissions by 40% instead of the 50% Biden initially wanted? A lot of climate change advocates are expressing disappointment over the fact that some of these concessions were made to get this bill passed or headed towards the House of Representatives, I think this weekend. I want to get your thoughts on that. Anyone can jump in and just unmute yourself.
Well, since I may not be able to stay as long as the other folks, I'll just start. The old saying, anybody with a weak stomach shouldn't see sausage made or their legislation. And obviously, Mike, you talked about the leasing of public lands. Obviously a lot of concessions had to be made. I mean, actually, to get Sinema and Manchin to vote, you can be sure that there was some serious, exchanges. For example, Manchin got approval for a pipeline to go through West Virginia and North Carolina that was not going to be approved at all. Sinema got a kind of a bone to throw to hedge fund people who give her, a significant amount, I think 10%, 15% of her campaign financing. So another old saying, this is an African proverb, that when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. We're the grass. And, the elephants were, there was one elephant and I guess a donkey, kind of going at it. It's funny. I want to kind of saddle along with this strategy that has been revealed, that the Democratic Party spent a lot of money supporting extreme right-wing candidates in Republican primaries, with the idea that when the open election came, they would be easier to defeat. It's like, what's wrong with this picture? And in this, there was a guy, for example, I forget his name, maybe from Indiana, I forget which one it was, but a Republican who voted to impeach Trump, who was defeated primarily by the influx of Democratic Party money for the extreme right-wing Trump-supporting opponent, election-denying opponent, in the Republican primary. So the elephants and the donkeys are fighting, and we, the grass, are hoping that that one foot, misses us and the other one doesn't. If in the process, they move climate change along, they move Medicare along, the Medicare, what is it? The Medicare negotiation piece you said is restricted to only 10 drugs out of, hundreds. So the elephants are not just the Democrats and the Republicans, they're also Big Pharma, the oil and gas industry, a few others, which are permanent, part of what's called the permanent government. These are permanent features of the government. I could say more, but those are just my initial reactions.
Professor Foster? Oh, unmute.
Yeah, Michael, thank you. And I agree with a lot of what Harold was saying. For me, and I'm glad to see progress. I'm happy to see the Democrats moving something forward. I do think it gives them some momentum. But frankly, I think that the climate change bill is far more important and far more substantial than it is politically useful. Climate does not have that large of a political base. Even though climate change may keep us alive, it may save the planet, for some reason it doesn't seem to resonate with most voters, but it is a win nonetheless. The Medicare negotiations is a big deal, as Harold said, very narrowly, yet it's a big deal. It's the first time that basically the government has been allowed to negotiate on behalf of the American people. And that's no small thing. I think the most significant thing, and why it's allowed to be called the Inflation Reduction Bill, is that the tax piece of it, which puts a base of 15%, basically a 15% minimum tax on corporations, is also substantial and meaningful and a move in the right direction. Having said that, though, I'm still not impressed, and I believe a lot of Joe Biden's base won't be impressed until we get voting rights. I know we supposedly can't in this environment, but unless we get voting rights and unless we do something substantial about a woman's right to choose, the base may be mollified. And one other quick point that Harold touched on, this whole notion of propping up extreme right-wing candidates, to me, is insane. Because to me, just pragmatically, it would seem that if you propped up the Republicans who should be propped up, the Republican base probably wouldn't support them in November. And even if you lose to them, you have lost to the better candidate for the country. I just don't see any upside in spending money to help insurrectionists.
And that's the thing. I was thinking, why is it that when the Democrats get on one page finally, it's to do something this risky? but to the point of the Medicaid provision in the bill, this is something that both Democrats and Republicans have been trying to do since Clinton, I think, which is to allow Medicaid to negotiate drug prices. I know I'm watching the 2000 debates with Bush versus Gore. Bush proposed it. Trump said he wanted to go after this. Obama in 2008 made a speech in which he was calling for this to finally get done. Biden gets it done. And so, does the GOP have a valid point, though, despite the success, despite the progress that's within this bill, that the Inflation Reduction Act will not, in fact, reduce inflation? And if so, does this undermine the Democrats' momentum or potential momentum heading into this November's midterm elections?
Not really. I mean, to the extent they've got momentum, they've got momentum. The inflation discussion is real, but it is much more psychological than it is real. And I think if this particular piece of legislation or this string of legislation and other things that the president and so-called Democrats are talking about get insinuated into people's heads, that's a better place to be than to try to talk about how inflation is going down or not going down by X or Y percent or whatever. But the American public is fascinated with inflation and fascinated with the idea of blaming somebody for causing it and somebody else for fixing it. And it doesn't work that way because it's too multifaceted for any one person to fix. And it's too multifaceted for the cause to be identified in one place or another. The Medicare bill or the pharmaceutical piece of it is amazing to me because it is the first time in the history of Christendom that pharma has lost any legislative battle in the Congress. They never lose. This is just fantastic because they've lost. Now, is it enough? No. Is it limited to 10 pieces of 10 products? Yes. And that's not nearly good enough. And there's no cap on insulin for people who aren't on Medicare. And that's bad. But the good news is it's legislation that does what it does. It's not temporary legislation. It doesn't have a sunset provision like the so-called assault weapon ban that had a 10-year sunset. And everybody thought, well, once we get our foot in the door, they'll never go back. And of course, they went back big time. So it's there, and it's something to build on. It's not something to be elated about or to put your feet up and retire on, but it is amazing to me that pharma has lost this because they hate it. It is the beginning of the end for them if it grows. Now, I don't know if it will, of course, but they can't stand it, and that's sort of a good thing.
When you look at the wins that this administration has had, and it hasn't been a full 2 years yet, the unemployment rate falling to 3.5%, matching its lowest levels in the last 50 years. The U.S. economy adding 528,000 jobs in July, far exceeding expectations. Sign-ups for the Affordable Care Act, marketplaces have reached record level. Biden appointed more federal judges than any president going back to Reagan, and he appointed the first African-American woman to the Supreme Court. He signed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, something Trump couldn't do for 4 years. He signed the most significant gun legislation in 30 years. He signed the CHIPS and Science Act into law, which would boost U.S. chip manufacturing and making the United States more competitive against China. The Justice 40 initiative, which is aimed at combating racial injustice, the first of its kind executive program. He got the United States out of America's longest war in Afghanistan and continues to take intense political heat for that decision. He, under his watch, Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri, who replaced Osama bin Laden as the leader of Al-Qaeda, has been killed. He's leading the charge in the United States Senate, overwhelmingly voting to add Sweden and Finland to NATO. He signed the PACT Act, this week after GOP senators folded, securing another victory for American veterans. And he does this all while his own party members have struggled with stating whether or not they support him for re-election in 2024. And the other side just continues to try to portray him as an old, senile, doddering, sleepy Joe. I want to get your view. Like, why is it that despite all of the success, that people are still struggling, especially in his own party, to state whether or not they're going to support him in 2024?
Well, because the party hasn't been able to articulate these successes nearly as well as you just did. I mean, this is a long string, a litany of successes, skins on the wall that nobody articulates, nobody advertises, nobody promotes. I mean, it is amazing. I mean, it's just amazing. I come from a more pragmatic, I think, wing of the party in terms of some of these things. I don't think the perfect needs to be the enemy of the good. So I am gratified by a lot of these accomplishments, even though they're not on the scale that progressives would like them to be. I frankly thought that the president should have been a little bit more aggressively engaged in the ugly sausage making that Professor McDougall referred to earlier, in terms of giving concessions to Manchin and Sinema. I mean, I think these concessions could have been made months ago. So it always flabbergasted me as to why he couldn't buttonhole those two in a room, as president months ago to get some of this, to move the ball down the field a little earlier. And I'm also flabbergasted, along with my brother and I guess whoever else has mentioned this, by the Democrats' strategy of propping up the crazies to run against. I mean, it's really unethical. I mean, if these people are supposed to be as dangerous as we clearly see they are, I mean, it's unpatriotic to prop them up in any way for any purpose. And it's just amazing that I don't know how that got by who. I don't know how that strategy got implemented. I don't know who approved that. I don't know who came up with that. Now as an individual voter, I should admit, as an individual voter, I live in a state where there is open primaries, and I do, and it's a red state. I live in probably the reddest state in the nation, and so I do vote in the Republican primary, and I vote, against the lesser of evils, against who I perceive to be the lesser of evils. That even got me voting for Trump in 2016 in the Alabama primary, because I thought Ted Cruz was a threat. So these things can backfire. Is basically my point. And so those are my observations.
Michael, you're muted.
Sorry. The anniversary of Richard Nixon's resignation seemed to now be another marker for another historic event, and that was when the FBI raided former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida in search of some classified documents that the president apparently took with him when he left the White House. Of course, Trump already pounced on the opportunity to campaign and fundraise off of this event. So I want to ask you, has the FBI raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago home proven to be politically beneficial in your view for Trump?
It's definitely red meat for the base, in as much as how, the investigate Trump portion of the Democratic Party base, which is a very large portion of the base, excuse me. But, and of course, this is Merrick Garland, who is an institutionalist. This is a guy who was a federal prosecutor, who was chief judge of the DC circuit. So he's not going to be signing off on these things if it's not, unless it's, something that's super, super important. So, and especially today with him announcing that he wants to unseal and really announce what exactly they were looking for on these searches. So I think it might be politically beneficial in the sense of, hey, Biden is, fighting for us. hey, Merrick Garland actually is doing something and not just sleeping in the Justice Department offices. But as to what it actually turns up, because, you know, I, for one, have seen it look like curtains for Trump for a lot of things. There have been a lot of things that I thought, oh, this is it. They finally got him. And then he kind of wiggled out. So I'll only believe Trump is going to prison when I see him being frog marched out of Mar-a-Lago on the news. But it is a step in the right direction. And I think that does matter.
And
I think it's really important to recognize that as he said, it's, you know, he said it's red meat for the Democratic base. It's also red meat for the Republican base. And this is basically Trump's fundraising capabilities were on the decline. And as soon as this happened, it was a perfect opportunity for him to, you know, rev up his base. And now the contributions are coming in stronger. All of these Republicans who were beginning to step away from him have now all jumped, you know, unified, you know, behind him. The election deniers, you know, all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is very, very serious. There was a guy from the Pew Charitable Trust, I guess, who was being interviewed about polling, and he was talking about how, you know, the majority of Americans, you know, 70% of Americans feel this way, only 30% feel that way, and he said, you know, those numbers can be deceiving. He said, because the 70% who believed in this is something progressive, the 70% believed in something progressive, 30% believed in something reactionary. The 70% who believed in the progressive thing believed in it, but their hearts weren't like deep in it. But the 30% who believed in the reactionary policy were very, very strong. These were things that were at the top of their agenda. And he was saying that makes a difference. You know, I mean, I remember having a conversation with some people in the Democratic Party about their strategy. It wasn't this thing of like propping up the crazies, but it was the milder version of that from about 4 or 5 years ago. You know, like Trump, you know, like, let's let him go. Not George, not not Romney, Jeff, you know, Bush, Jeb Bush, not Jed Bush. You know, he'll be easy to defeat. And I was saying, you know, well, people are really going to be not so happy about Hillary. And they say, well, what are they going to do? Vote Republican? And I said, no, they're not going to vote Republican. They're not going to vote at all. And that's what happened. So I think that we have to be very, very careful with this notion of like how much support there is behind progressive policies, because there's a lot of support, but it's not strong support. The right wing is very, very strong in terms of their ideology. Again, there's a book called Banana Republicans. You might want to take a look at that. Just traces how the Republican Party strategy has been in process since about 1947, 1948, when they decided to try to reverse the New Deal. There was a meeting in someplace in Europe, trying to remember what the name of the town was, but Milton Friedman was there, Ronald Reagan was there, Ayn Rand was there, you know, these kinds of people. And, you know, they kind of plotted out a course, and they've been following it, you know, ever since. The Democrats just seem to be, they're just not as sophisticated, you know, in this, maybe not as ruthless, maybe not as focused. I'm not sure what it is, but I think that it is somehow connected to this fact that the 70% of the country that's in favor of progressive policies is not, they don't feel it as viscerally as the 30% who are very much opposed.
Yeah. And of course, you know, the FBI was looking to, they actually seized paper records, and it centered around the alleged mishandling of White House records. Trump has already made comparisons with Watergate, trying to make this as political as possible, because if he can muddy the waters to make it look like this was a politically motivated event, not only is the FBI discredited, but like you said, Professor McDougall, you know, the base is given a reason to be angry again, and Trump does best when there's a grievance involved. And so that was interesting because of the fact that it came right up the heels of the anniversary of the resignation that came as a result of Watergate. But what's also interesting is that you have President Trump, former President Trump, making this appeal. to his supporters. He's continuing to allege fraud and everything like that. And what's being lost is that Merrick Garland, who was long criticized as someone who's a pacifist, someone who is too moderate, someone who's too soft and too not aggressive enough, has really come out looking as if he's got some fight in him this week. So it's not just Biden that might get a second look by the American public, but the Attorney General himself, who repeated to a reporter when asked, "No one is above the law." Any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with Nate that I will believe that Donald Trump is really in trouble when I see him being perp walked, because he seems to have the original white privilege. But it does give me some pause and some hope that, at least from what I understand, and unless I misunderstood this, that this is the second time that the FBI has gone to Mar-a-Lago this year with a warrant. And this is the second time that materials have been seized from Mar-a-Lago. And the fact that it's gone public and it was made public by Donald Trump hints to me of his probable desperation about what was taken from his house, because not that facts matter to his base, not that facts matter to the Republicans in Congress, but facts do matter to most grand juries, and facts do matter to most juries and judges. I'm kind of double-minded about whether or not I want him indicted before he announces his candidacy for president. Because politically, and again, we can double think ourselves, I think DeSantis is a bigger political threat than Trump. But Trump has, again, forced all of the Republicans, virtually all of them, into the boat with him, not knowing what the FBI has seized. So we have some interesting months ahead of us. It will be a very unboring fall.
Yeah. And that's the thing, search warrants require probable cause. And the thing that people are not realizing is that the search warrant wouldn't have been in place at all. A federal judge would not have signed off on it if there was not a reason to search the Mar-a-Lago home. And no one's talking about the fact that no one even knows what the details of this search are. We just know that there was a search. Professor Cook.
Yeah. But Mike, you're way too intellectualizing this, because this has got nothing to do with facts, as Professor Foster said. The base that is outraged, the apparatus that is expressing outrage, cares not one bit about the facts. You are burdened with this law degree, and you understand a little bit about how probable cause works and what the Constitution says. But think about this. A kind of thought experiment is, this may not be from Merrick Garland's point of view, because I do agree with Mr. Honoré that Mr. Garland is an institutionalist. And he may not be so much interested in locking Mr. Trump up as he is in getting these documents back. Now, I have represented people at a very much lower level than the President of the United States in these kind of security situations. The FBI, the Department of Justice, is maniacal about preserving so-called national security documents. People with top secret clearances and top secret and above clearances who somehow get hold of documents, keep them, take them home, whatever that they aren't supposed to do, drives them just to a really extreme point of behavior. And I suggest to people they think about Merrick Garland's mission is not our mission, or some of our mission, which is to put Mr. Trump behind bars. He may simply be trying to do what an institutionalist at the Department of Justice counterintelligence part of it does. I want those Lincoln documents back. I want them back. Now, I think that the two visits, and I agree with Professor Foster that I think there's two visits that the FBI made. One was much less formal, I guess is the word to use. But the Justice Department doesn't believe that Mr. Trump and his people were truthful in identifying what he had and turning it over, because it was the property of the government of the United States of America. And this search warrant may simply be just to get those documents. Now, having them is a crime. Whether you prosecute them is something different. Famously, Sandy Berger took documents, violated the Records Act, because he wanted to prevent records that showed him in a bad light from coming to the attention of the public. He wound up leading to a misdemeanor and lost his law license, all kinds of foolish stuff like that. Most of the people don't get prosecuted. The people I've represented were mostly absent-minded and probably didn't deserve prosecution, but the government wasn't trying to prosecute them. It was a huge negotiation. We just want the documents back. And we want to make sure you haven't done something improper with them in the time you had them improperly. So it may be as simple as that in terms of the objective of the Attorney General, as opposed to putting Mr. Trump in steel bracelets. I think he has other issues that may be much more likely to result in him being indicted and prosecuted than this. Although I do think there's probably been a crime committed. But the problem is most people who commit this crime aren't prosecuted anyway, whether they're the president or not.
Yeah, I hear you, Professor Cook, but this search was of the president of the United States residence. So I just don't think that they would go to this length just to get documents back. I mean, especially somebody with already a rap sheet or an accusatory sheet as long as Trump's is. I find that just hard to believe that they would just do it just for that purpose.
I just interrupt, not just for that purpose, but because of what he would do with the documents that he had. Because he is known to talk about them improperly. He's known to show them to people, to show how powerful he is. That's why they wanted them back.
Right.
They don't really care whether he got a bunch of presidential doodles that he shouldn't have had, that he should turn over. They care that he in his braggadocious self may talk about launch codes, may talk about the location of CIA agents, may talk about sensitive information that should not be talked about. And they don't want him having those pieces of paper in his possession. So
Correct.
From my perspective, that's the why we got to get him back, because this guy can't be trusted with it.
Right. I think, though, the why we got to get him back, or not the why we got to get him back necessarily, but why we are doing this, the institutional objective might also be, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, you attorneys, but if they can convict Trump of even mishandling of federal documents, especially top secret federal documents, wouldn't that be enough to prevent him from ever being able to run for office again? I think there's because I think that there is an institutional interest in the Beltway, including, I mean, it's a bipartisan interest in Trump not being able to run again. I'm positive that the Senate Majority Leader does not want Trump running again. He wants to be rid of Trump just as much as probably we do, for his own reasons. And I'm sure, I mean, you'll notice that a lot of the Senate leadership haven't said really anything. I'm talking McConnell and Thune and guys like that. They hold no brief for Trump anymore. And so I'm just thinking that, I think similar to how Al Capone went down on some simple, tax evasion stuff, that at the end of the day, they may eliminate him from running again, based on something that is not as big as what he has actually done.
The question really is, I think Stephen's a really good point. The question is, does Merrick Garland feel the way that you're talking about? In other words, the Democratic establishment or whatever it is, they'd be happy, to not have Trump, run again. But in other words, in terms of what Fred said, if it turns out that Merrick Garland's only objective was completely by the book, that is to get these documents back this guy shouldn't have, he might say something about launch codes without thinking at all about what are the implications for this guy's, presidential aspirations. It could historically be seen as a really dumb move. I mean, because if this is all he's after, and he's handed Trump this big publicity bonanza, but when as I was talking, as I was hearing Fred talk, I put in the chat, so Trump gets a free ride out of this. It's like, I was horrified listening to what Fred said because it started to make sense to me. I mean, again, we might find out that he was that guileless, to just say, I'm by the book. I need to get these documents. I'm going to use the FBI to get them because that's what the law. Let's take care of this. Forget about it. Although some of the CNN commentators pointed out that the raid took place 92 days before the midterm elections. And Fred, you could probably speak to this, but they implied that there was a kind of an unwritten rule inside the FBI that you don't go after any political candidate within 90 days of the elections. Now, Trump's not running, but he might as well be.
But James Comey seems to have broken that rule already on behalf of Trump.
That's why James Comey is a jackass and should be excoriated because he did something that he really, really wasn't supposed to do. But I will say this, what Stephen Foster said, there is some dispute that even if Donald John Trump was charged with a felony for taking these documents and violating the Records Act, I'm not sure that disables him to run for president of the United States because, unfortunately, the Constitution sets out the criteria for being president, and it doesn't say don't be a felon.
Yeah, and the Senate.
I'm sorry, Mike, real quick.
Yeah.
There's congressional legislation that says that.
That's right. But
it's not the Constitution.
But it's not.
And this goes up to the Supreme Court, and I can see what that 6-3 majority might do with that.
And this
so just
opportunity. Go ahead, Mr. Frost. I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to clarify. So there is federal law that would prohibit a felon in this case from seeking federal office.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that law hasn't been. Obviously, it hasn't been in play, so therefore it hasn't been challenged. But
as to a president, but it's been applied to lots of people who ain't the president, but just not the president.
Okay. Wow. Well, so there is precedent for that law for the application of that law generally. So that would strengthen. I mean, if the law has been applied before for federal office, not
for a constitutional officer. That's the problem.
Okay.
And I don't know the answer. I'm just telling you, if I'm Trump's lawyer, I'm raising that, and we're gonna have to take that to the Supreme Court.
Right. Okay.
And you know what we have there.
Yeah.
and
we have a lock.
The Senate twice had the opportunity to prevent Trump from running again. I would have thought at the time that it was in Mitch McConnell's best interest.
It was.
In Lindsey Graham's best interest, the one who's now singing "I Can't Live Without You" for Trump, telling these folks.
And Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton, who are both probably announcing, probably counting down until November when they announce.
Right,
well.
but even excluding personal ambition, just the fact that you can move on without getting your hands stained with being anti-Trump. Let the Democrats do it. I would have thought that would have been in their best interest to kind of turn the page and get back to just going after traditional, tax cuts for the top income earning Americans, repealing regulations that were in place by previous Democratic administrations. I just thought that was just in alignment with what someone like Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, John Thune would have wanted to do. But they twice had the opportunity. The bus left the station twice, and so now they're in this predicament. But what's also interesting is that Trump is on record countless times saying, you know, those who have something to hide plead the Fifth Amendment. He also said the mob pleads the Fifth Amendment. And then lo and behold, just like everything else, he has to come back and eat crow because now he's pleading the Fifth Amendment before Attorney General of New York, Letitia James. What are your thoughts about, because we touched a little bit about potential, charges on tax evasion or anything pertaining to his enterprise and business being the downfall of Trump. What are the implications, do you think, of the Attorney General of New York's investigation because of his decision to plead the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination? And what about Trump? What kind of implications does this have for him, who previously was on record saying, look, if you have something to hide, you wouldn't plead the Fifth?
Mike, I'm just going to say I'm going to have to leave soon, but I stayed longer than I expected because I couldn't tear myself away. It's been a great conversation. I would just leave you with this one thought, that we're looking at there's a level upon which we're living in the Weimar Republic. You guys know what I'm talking about. The kind of the liberal, kind of progressive, thinking that, democracy is going to win out. It's all going to be fine. Then you got this other thing happening. And at first, nobody takes it seriously. There was a movie years ago called Ship of Fools that was about a liner that was leaving Latin America with some prisoners or something like that. And they were heading for Germany. And it was about 2 years before Hitler took over. And the way they behave it'll just chill your bones if you think about analogies to the way people are behaving now. This Hungarian leader was at CPAC, basically, hey guys, here's the playbook. And there is a worldwide shift towards authoritarianism and right-wing leadership. And we need to be taking it very, very seriously, a lot more seriously than some of the people who are higher up in the political hierarchy seem to be doing. On that cheery note, I will leave you, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Professor McDougall. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was going to mention that Viktor Orban, that Hungarian prime minister who spoke at CPAC. This is an authoritarian strongman. He is a blatant authoritarian strongman, and he's speaking at a convention of conservative, basically Republicans. That blew my mind. That was I don't even know how they position that from a PR standpoint. But he was like a keynote speaker or something. So we are completely in free fall in terms of the survival of this this experiment in constitutional republicanism. And so I just echo. I was thinking along the same lines as Professor McDougall.
Oh, Professor Foster, you're muted. Professor, you're on mute.
I said we're out of epithets because Marjorie Taylor Greene, or Marjorie from Georgia, crazy Marjorie, was called a white Christian nationalist. And she said, I am a white Christian nationalist, and I'm proud of it. So the things that we say to drop the mic on these people, they're embracing, and it's not hurting them. So I think we are indeed in free fall.
What's interesting is that Merrick Garland breaks his silence today as well and comes out and indicates that he's going to unseal the search warrant that was granted, that gave the FBI permission to go to Mar-a-Lago in the first place. And of course, this comes because of the intense criticism that Republicans have given to the FBI institution, given to the Biden administration, given to the Justice Department. You've got Republican congressmen like Kevin McCarthy promising to investigate the FBI once they get the majority, if they get the majority. They seem to be at the cusp of that just by a few congressmen. And that's in addition to the fact that they've been saying since Biden got in office in 2021 that they want to investigate Hunter Biden. That being said, was Attorney General Garland's decision, to unseal the search warrant, was that the right move in your view? And if possible, do you believe that the FBI's apolitical nature or apolitical reputation, rather, is forever stained because of the Mar-a-Lago raid this week?
Well, first off, I think, yes, it is a good decision to unseal. It puts the ball back in Trump's hands because Trump has the power to block it from being unsealed, or conversely, he can release the warrant himself. So if he blocks it, then you can say, well, what do you have to hide then? I thought you were innocent. As far as the FBI, no one actually believes the FBI is apolitical. Nobody on the right or on the left believes that. And I don't think anyone has believed that the FBI is apolitical for a very long time. So, its reputation being stained isn't something that necessarily is going to affect most people. It is interesting to see, however, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, people like Kevin McCarthy, and the like say now that their friend is getting in a little legal trouble that we should defund the FBI. But I'm gonna let everyone decide for themselves what that means and the irony of that statement.
Yeah, I saw. I listened intently to the Attorney General this afternoon in his brief press appearance and explanation. And man, I mean, he took personal responsibility for authorizing or seeking authorization for the search. And I think that was a bold, that was a great move. And I also think that the Justice Department, in so doing, in his doing that, I think he took heat away from the FBI and put it on the DOJ, where I think it becomes a personal thing, where his own reputation and his own persona and what have you is juxtaposed to the 45th president of the United States, and I think that bodes well from a political and public relations standpoint going forward.
Yesterday, Donald Trump said that he was going to spend the day with racist attorney general from the state of New York. And that said to me that he's going to run as a victim. He has trouble in New York. He has trouble in Georgia. Obviously, he has trouble with the feds. And all of this, his only real protection is not legal, it's political. Even the notion of declaring his candidacy, again in this white privilege world, gives him an unofficial cloak of invulnerability. So I'm frustrated with the timing of these prosecutions, because it's a surprise to no one that November is now about 70 days away. All of this could have been done in a more timely way from a prosecutorial point of view. Excuse me.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I've been critical of Merrick Garland for a long time, because I think this whole foolishness of, for example, just the Records Act violation. This has been going on for 18 months. There is no need for this to have dragged on this long. Merrick Garland's attention to some of the offshoots from the January 6th committee's investigation. Again, 2 years almost, and they just begin to focus on those things. I have been very, very unhappy with that approach. And I get the fact that the Justice Department has a relatively limited number of resources, and trying to prosecute 800 people who they arrested for basically street crimes, if you will, is difficult and logistically challenging. I get that. But this isn't a street crime. This isn't a drug operation, a drug network. This isn't a bank robbery fencing operation where you squeeze the guys at the bottom to get to the guy at the top. This was not hard to see that this other on the ground at the Capitol operation was going on, and they haven't done it. And what's happened, of course, is that the voices that support Mr. Trump have continued to put out a whole bunch of foolishness to cloud the issue and to make the prosecution suspect just talking about the prosecution, let alone the actual prosecution. I was reading something earlier this week that said 54% of the American adults read below the 6th grade reading level. So people aren't, Professor Foster will be offended by this, aren't reading critically, aren't reading for comprehension because they don't read anything. So they don't know this stuff. So what Donald Trump says to them resonates with what other foolishness they have in their head, and that's what they know. But they don't bother to read the Constitution. They don't bother to understand that a magistrate judge has to approve a search warrant. It isn't a political operation on the part of Merrick Garland who says, I'm gonna just roll up in your house and drop a search warrant on you. It's not that simple. But it's easy to sell that to people who don't really know anything. And the ignorance of this causes us not to have any epithets. Congresswoman Boebert says, I'm sick and tired of this separation of church stuff. Well, wait a minute, lady. You're supposed to support and defend the Constitution. It's sort of written in there. I mean, this is not something somebody interpreted. These words are literally in there. But, she and they don't care about any sort of factual analysis, any critical analysis, any trying to understand a situation and work through it. They are just passionately ignorant, and they want you to be passionately ignorant with them. It's amazing. But it's where we are.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Foster.
Well, I was just going to say this goes to Professor Cook's earlier point about the intensity of the 30% versus the lack of intensity on the 70%. Because the 30%, to them, this is like a crusade. This is their support of Trumpism, theocracy. I mean, it's a religious. They do it with religious fervor. There's something. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's internal. It's intestinal or whatever it is. But I mean, it's just deep inside them, and it's in their blood. I mean, so it's. And then if you overlay that with the ignorance piece, where that's something that's you can't just fix, with just logic. So we're in a bad place.
Yes, and we're landing the plane now, but with the last remaining 5 minutes, I do want to ask because Speaker Pelosi's trip did spark an antagonistic response from the Chinese government, who have conducted military drills on the coast of Taiwan. This is after Xi Jinping has expressed his dissatisfaction with the speaker's trip. Now, she did receive an award while she was overseas in that country. Of course, Newt Gingrich went to that country in 1997. There wasn't nearly this much controversy surrounding that trip. But I want to get your thoughts on whether or not Beijing used Pelosi's trip to Taiwan as a pretext for its stepped-up aggression toward the self-governing island, including live fire military drills conducted over the past week.
Well, I was asked this earlier, and I've been trying to figure out what was Nancy Pelosi's motivation to go there. And my initial thought, well, it's election season, and the Democrats want to look hawkish about something, but that doesn't really fly with me. I believe the only rational reason I can come up with, and this is pure speculation, is that President Biden, following President Obama, is trying to build basically a Southeast Asia version of NATO, and the teasing of China vis-a-vis Taiwan may give other Southeast Asian countries who are either allied with us or considering being allied with us more concrete reasons to be allied with us, meaning that China is the big stick in the region, and they need protection. And I think that this demonstrates to them that they need protection. That's my theory.
And that may well be. I mean, I had trouble with it too. I was like, well, why are you just poking a stick in their eye, appearing like you're poking a stick in their eye just to do it? But she does raise a point that did cause me to reflect a bit, which is Lindsey Graham and a delegation of senators were in Taiwan in May, and the Chinese said nothing. They met with the same president and tooled around and did the same kind of stuff she did. And so the question that it caused me to sort of mull over was, well, what is different about this from the Chinese perspective? Is it timing? Is there something else going on simultaneously? Why did they get so bent out of shape about Nancy Pelosi going there when Lindsey Graham and a delegation of senators, Republicans and Democrats, didn't seem to cause much of a flap? Yeah, and I don't have an answer for that. It's just curious to me still.
Yeah, I was waiting for the answer on that one.
No, I don't know. Nancy Pelosi would tell you it's because she's a girl, and I don't know.
Well, I noticed that the president was asked about this, and he basically kind of shoved it off as this was her decision.
Yeah.
He didn't endorse it. So I noted that. And the word I was looking for earlier was visceral.
I'm wondering if this has anything to do with the fact that she's third in line to the presidency. That coupled with the fact that Biden has made it a point that, he wants to take a position to support Taiwan the same way the United States has taken a position to support Ukraine in light of Putin's aggression and unprovoked war. But if there are no other thoughts, I want to thank you, Professor Cook, Professor Foster, Mr. Foster, Nate, and Professor McDougall. This was a panel I was so excited to have. And, this is what happens when you get all my favorite professors in one conversation, and Nate. So I'm so excited to, be able to have this kind of episode for tonight on a week like this, a momentous week. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope that you tune in next week, Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay away from sketchy news sources and only question the sources that you do get your news from. Challenge them, compare them with other sites. And I just want to go ahead and thank you all again before I conclude episode 68 of The Political Mic. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Mike.